So growing up, I grew in a Christian household. I went to a non-denominational church and I really loved going there. I was excited to go every Sunday. And I would say that both of my parents are definitely have their own personal relationships with God. I know a lot of people say they grew up Christian, and by that they mean they went to church occasionally or that like their grandma used to pray for them. But my family was definitely very strong in their faith. So I definitely would say that I was walking with God as a child. I would say as early as around 5 years old, I remember actually asking God to come into my life as my Lord and Savior. So I would say I have been a Christian, thankfully, since childhood. However, I stayed a baby Christian and was spiritually immature for essentially all of my life up until the last previous year, really.
Yeah.
So then growing up, I knew God and I had a pretty normal, healthy childhood, and nothing really happened during that. But it was when I entered college that things started to change. Going into college, I was never really interested in all the things they say to stay away from: drugs, sex, alcohol. I had no interest in it whatsoever until the summer after my freshman year. Me and my best friend were staying at the school to do summer classes. And then during that time, we both just became very, I guess, bored, lonely, and we were really stressed at school and weren't having a very great time. And that's when we both decided to kind of explore worldly things. So then we both randomly decided to get on dating apps. And that's kind of when I was exposed to all these different sorts of sin that I should have not been involving myself in. In particular, I met this one guy through Tinder, of all apps, and he was really friendly. He was really nice, and he said that he was also Christian. So it's like, okay, this is great. That's fine. And I really enjoyed getting to know him and talking to him. And I told him, oh, I'm Christian. I don't want to have sex and things like that. And he was very respectful of it. He's like, oh, yeah, that's like no problem. But then he did mention to me too, like, like you can have sex and you won't go to hell. Like, it's okay. So I was like, So like I started to become curious about that. And I really should have went to the Bible and to God in prayer to ask him about this. But instead, I just went to the internet and listened to other Christians who didn't probably read the Bible themselves. So
Is
then, yeah, so then I thought that, oh, it's okay because the only reason God doesn't want us to have sex is he's just trying to protect our feelings, and that's pretty much the only reason. So that is part of the truth, but that's not the whole truth of
what?
why we should not be having sex before marriage. Um, so then I fell into a lot of sexual sin, and I really felt no conviction about it this entire time. I just really convinced myself that it was okay and God didn't mind. I would literally remember going to like church on Zoom and having a great time. And then I'd go off to go do sinful things and thought nothing of it the whole time. um, and then so I went on like this for quite a long time until I realized, well, actually, throughout this time, I actually experienced a lot of sexual assault, but it never really dawned on me that it was sexual assault until much later on. And I feel like, unfortunately, that's a really common experience for a lot of women. They'll mention things that happened that kind of upset them or made them uncomfortable, but they don't realize that what happened definitely wasn't okay and shouldn't have happened in the first place. But then later on, I actually experienced being raped twice. And then that's what led to, you could say, me growing, walking stronger with God and seeking God more. Specifically, it led to me developing major depressive disorder and post traumatic stress disorder. And that was a whole life changing experience itself, too. Every day, all day, I was constantly crying. As soon as I'd wake up, I'd start crying. I was very irritable all the time. I was very stuck in like fight or flight mode. I was just always on edge and really felt a sense of urgency all the time and very restless. And during this time, I would go to church occasionally, still online through Zoom. I never really found a church home in Baltimore, Maryland. I liked the church that I had back in Kalamazoo, so I'd watch that periodically. And I guess back then, initially, I guess I would say throughout college, I definitely strayed, I guess you could say, got off the narrow road and strained my relationship with God. So I still did believe in God, but I didn't really seek Him to help me necessarily throughout this time. So I just saw all the worldly things people say. So I went to therapy, I tried medication, I did exercise, I did literally everything everyone would say to do to help your mental health. And these things would sometimes help, sometimes they make it worse, but overall, they definitely weren't a permanent fix for the issues that I was experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something how it's very common for girls who have experienced sexual assault to not really realize that until years later, I don't know why I'm like feeling probed to ask this question or if you have a specific answer to it, but how would you distinguish like an instance of okay, this was maybe awkward or uncomfortable versus like this was sexual assault?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, but I guess once it becomes to that point where you feel awkward or uncomfortable and you express that in any way, and it doesn't even have to be like a verbal expression. I feel like it kind of is noticeable to both people in the interaction that it's uncomfortable and it's gone somewhere that it's not comfortable for at least one of the people. And I feel like that's when it starts to veer towards assault.
Yeah. Do you think like the guys can be, and this isn't what is the word, predator excusing, but do you think like they're aware of it in this instance, or do you think it's a cultural thing that has just made them kind of blind to the
Mhm.
reality of what's happening?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it's kind of hard to say. I feel like they're aware that's what's happening is uncomfortable, but I know a lot of them wouldn't classify it as assault or anything further. They would think that, oh, she just got upset, but it's fine. Like they don't actually really process that what happened truly isn't okay and that shouldn't have happened at all. So it's definitely a big part of our culture too. A lot of things that shouldn't be normal have become the norm.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that. I know those are kind of tough questions, but I went through a lot of the same thing, or at least like for me, a lot of not remembering anything in college, and just waking up in very sketchy situations.
Mhm.
And later on, hearing rumors that like frats would spike drinks and things like this. And for me, I was like, oh no, I was just like, it was probably my fault, which a part of it was like I shouldn't have been drinking or drinking that much the way that I was. But a part of me wondered looking back too, like, was there something extra going on? Because there's a lot I don't remember at all.
Yeah, and that's another unfortunate big factor is that people love to blame the victim, saying, "Well, what were you doing? Why are you talking to them? Like, it's your fault." And like you said, in a way, it's like, yes, you stepped into a situation, but doesn't mean you asked for that whole situation to happen to you and that it was okay that it happened.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of like I told you before we started recording, I know a lot of people have just started their semester or just went off to college for the first time. So I'm glad to have this conversation. I have an 18-year-old sister-in-law who's starting college, and she's reading all the statistics about, sexual assault and how it happens the most in the first couple of months or something, like when students are still very unaware of their surroundings and maybe they just got let loose from their family's protection for the first time, and they just kind of go crazy with that. And I told her, I was like, you know what? Like, I was like, you're always home. Like, all you do is go to work and class. I was like, you don't go to parties or drink. So I was like, I think you're a little bit more safe, than the girls who are out on campus maybe late at night, um, different situations like this. But also, I know that really terrible things can happen even when you didn't necessarily put yourself in that kind of situation.
Yeah, and that's another big thing I feel like in college, people feel like, "Oh, there's so many new things to explore," which is true and good, but there's a lot of things, negative things that you don't need to explore and they might feel like they're missing out on, but I can definitely say with, like, frat parties, drinking, and all of the craziness, drugs that, like, it may seem like you're missing out, but you're really not, like, it's not all that it seems to be, and I used to think, like, when I first entered college, before I even tried drinking at all, I thought, "Oh, it's pretty sad that people have to drink to have fun or be on drugs to have fun." And then I was like, oh, well, I don't want to be judgy. And then like I became that person. Like if I went to parties, I couldn't have fun unless I was drinking. And I realized too that every time I did have sex, I was always definitely not sober. So that's another factor too that I should have been doing that, but that it definitely isn't something that you need to be doing.
Yeah, that's so valid. And a big part of that is your environment,
Mhm.
like the friends that you make, because I thought that same thing. I grew up with addict parents. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to grow up and like abuse drugs and alcohol and all these things. And before I knew it, I was hardcore doing it because that was the people and places I was putting myself around. And I was quickly becoming like that environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely say with the friends I made, I'm still close to a lot of them, and we all kind of grew up the same. I want to say, I guess you could say sheltered, but then also just pretty innocent and not interested in things. And then we decided to explore all these things together, which was in a way good that we had each other and we could come out of that together too. Like one of my friends, she's also a very strong Christian, and we've definitely both grown in our relationship with God now. And we can look back at all the craziness we used to do, and like, wow, that's crazy that we went through all of that, but now we're on the other side of it.